Hello, BookTube. I'm Mike, and this is Riff Raff's Reading Renaissance. And today it's the promised Q&A session hosted by my very good friend Steve Donoghue. And my little dog is barking in the background. So I've seen all the questions that you've kindly sent through, so I've had a chance to think a little bit about them. But I haven't had a chance to think about what Steve, the Inquisitor, is going to ask me. So wish me luck, and let's connect to Steve. And there he is. Hello, there you are.
Here I am through the miracles of modern technology. Yes,
Hello.
indeed.
Hello, Stephen. Thank you so much.
I'm here to interrogate you.
Thank you so much. I'm very honored to be interrogated. And I'm very honored by the people who've sent so many questions in. I'm absolutely floored.
Yes, Mike sent me the questions. Lots of good questions. Lots of good people sending in questions. For in honor of your 500th subscriber. Oh wait. Oh wait. Are
Yes,
we doing
indeed.
this in honor of 500 subscribers?
Yes, the devious
Oh.
Mr. Steve decided to play with the numbers, and it seems that something strange has happened to my subscriber count because it's rocketed up above. I think at last count we were at 620 something. So I really don't know what's happening, but I'm very, very honored both by the wonderful subscribers and the marvelous questions you've sent in. And I must declare up front, I have seen the questions, so I've had a moment to think about them. But of course, there's Steve's questions to come, so who knows? So over to you, Steve.
Yes, and we should start with the most important question of all, which nobody on BookTube asked. Of course, that question is your dogs.
Ah, yes. Well, thank you for raising that question. It almost feels compulsory on BookTube to have cute dogs. I know you've got a lovely cute dog in Frida, and Shelley's got what I called the same dog. In fact, I wrote a comment early on with Shelley's comment saying Steve wants his dog back. And
Shelley Swearingen and I both have miniature schnauzer.
right. And of course, Book Time with Elvis. Elvis is even in the title, and he's a really cute dog. Now, I actually have three dogs, and they are in various degrees cute, but they are all very camera shy and some of them are so big and ungainly that they don't really fit into the space in which I film. So, what I think I'll have to do is insert a clip here so that you can see them. Anyway, for the BookTube community and in honor of my milestone, whatever it is, I've included a clip here of my three dogs.
There's another question that before we get to the BookTube, I promise I will get to the BookTube questions. I know that I'm renowned as a talkative prima donna, but I am going to yield the stage to other people's questions. But before we get to them, one other question that stems from something that you just mentioned about the space in which you film. Thinking about the space in which you film, I have the same question that I imagine most of your BookTube viewers have, which is, are you okay?
Yes, at the risk of answering one of the questions that's still coming, there's a backstory to this. When my wife found this house and fell in love with it and tried to persuade me to come and live here, we were already in a house in the same street, and there's no one on the planet that hates moving as much as me. So I said, I really don't want to move. And she came and she said, you must come and look at the house. And as we walked in, she said, you see the study in the front? It's a converted garage into a study. She said, if we take this house, you can have this whole study to yourself as long as you put all your rubbish in it. And the rubbish is the music CD collection, the musical equipment you see behind me on the wall, the books. So everything is in my man cave, which I'm very fortunate to have. But you couldn't swing a cat, which I'm sure will please you, Steve.
I suspect that's the hidden dream of many wives. Let's find a room and just stuff him in there.
I think it's very good. I'm reminded of Prince Philip, who, when asked about his marriage to Queen Elizabeth, which obviously was very long, he was asked what the secret of a long marriage was. He said, plenty of time apart. So I don't know whether that's part of it, but maybe my better half decided that if I lock myself into this man cave for a while, it balances us out, and we're probably better for it.
Doesn't always work, though. Deb and I spent the entire 17th century apart. We still hated each other just as much as ever when we got back together. But we don't want to talk about the Jacobite rebellion at this early stage of the Q&A. So I have the iPad here, and I have the questions. And you got some great ones. So we'll start off with Hannah at Hannah's Books, another champion of your channel. Uh, are there any books you loved as a young person that you've continued to reread consistently over the years? Are there any old favorites that you revisited after a decades-long break? So not a reread in this case, but a compulsive reread.
Well, first of all, I love Hannah to bits. She's one of my favorite channels, and thank you for the question, Hannah. I obviously retain fond memories of childhood reads, from Winnie the Pooh and 1066 and all that, and Just William and all those sort of books that in the 60s and 70s were popular. The problem I have is that I almost never reread, and I think that's driven by the fear of missing out on what's not yet read. And it's an inner conflict for me, I have to admit, because I'm very conscious listening to many, many booktubers of the joy of rereading, the real joy that comes from rereading and rereading more than once. You included, Steve. You talk often about how many times you've read something and how each time there's a further enrichment. And I really don't do that. And I haven't yet worked out how to balance the conflict of, there's more books left than I have time for, as applies to all of us, versus spending time rereading what I've already done. I honestly haven't resolved that conflict, and it remains a conflict. So it's a really good question.
So there aren't any books then for you that you
can't-
compulsively reread?
Not that I can
None.
bring to mind. None. Literally none.
Wow.
Someone might point out one that I'm wrong that I've read more than once, but there's none that I regularly read. There's one funny exception that suddenly occurs to me, and it's not really, I don't know if it counts, but it's amusing perhaps. There is a writer who used to be the editor of Punch magazine called Alan Coren. I don't know if that name means anything to you, Steve, but Alan Coren was a humorist. His daughter is Victoria Coren Mitchell, who you see on the TV maybe with David Mitchell, and he wrote a series of humorous books. And he wrote a book called The Cricklewood Dome. And the dome, if you imagine someone now blocking Steve's head above the eyes, so all you can see is the very top of Steve's head. That shape of head was sticking up above a brick wall, and under the title of the book, The Cricklewood Dome, because he lived in Cricklewood, and he had the same sort of style of hairstyle that Steve has. So, and he wrote this very humorous book, and in there's a short story about putting the Christmas fairy on the top of the tree at Christmas, and the fact that although you packed the Christmas fairy away last year, you're buggered if you can find her now, and you have to rush off at the last minute to get one from the market. And it is one of the funniest stories ever. And I inflicted on my family for many, many years the fact that one of our Christmas rituals was just after the Queen's speech at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Dad would roll out this book and read. It's about 5 pages long, and the kids would all roll their eyes. And I always used to say to them, when I'm long dead and gone, you'll remember this. This was one of our rituals, and it really is that funny. So if anyone hasn't read The Cricklewood Dome, I would recommend it, and particularly the story in it about the Christmas fairy. It's one of the funniest things I've ever read in 5 pages. So that's a reread technically, but other than that, really not.
Wow. Well, okay, that's news to me. Before we move on, though, I should point out you mentioned that I have mentioned many times rereading things over and over and over again and always finding something new and worthwhile in them. I should point out that is not true for Steve Alton's novel Meg. I do compulsively reread Steve Alton's novel Meg, but I don't find anything new and interesting in it each time. In fact, I think it's possible that it gets worse every time I read it. Anyway, I didn't want people going there thinking there's unlimited treasures. There's very limited treasures in Meg.
There are a few aspects to your reading taste that intrigue me, Steve, but that's perhaps a video for another day.
Okay, the next question is from Allison Talks Books. And unbelievably, her question is not in 50 parts. With ample footnotes and secondary sources conscientiously cited. Instead, it's just a normal question. I'm curious about the bookstores in your area. Do you buy books primarily online, or is there a local store you like visiting? You've touched on this a few times yourself in your videos.
Yeah, indeed.
Always a fascinating question. Where do booktubers get their books? That is always fascinating.
Yeah, indeed. Well, thank you, Alison. I have to say, Alison's channel is just fantastic. She makes us think, and I really, really enjoy it. So I would highly recommend. I think I'm going to have to put links to all of these people in the thing below, so that we don't keep having to read out long, complicated addresses. But if you don't know Alison, guys, you should. So let me answer her question. South Africa doesn't really have a big reading culture. If I think about it, of course, indigenously, the culture is oral storytelling. That's a huge part of the culture here. So the tradition of written books is perhaps less ingrained. We have a population of about 60 million people, and only about 5 million, that's less than 10%, regularly buy books. So the industry is substantially smaller than some of the ones, that we look at in your parts of the world. Um, Here we have sort of one big bookstore retail chain called Exclusive Books, which is, I suppose, similar to the American Barnes& and Noble or the British Watersons. And increasingly, I'm sad to say their retail stock consists of pens and coffee mugs and elaborate bookmarks and less books, And again, only the books that sell in great volume, like James Patterson and Brandon Sanderson and that sort of stuff. The classic books collection will be one narrow column of bookshelves, and all the predictable ones. I could sit and write them out by name now before even going and looking as to which ones they'll have and which ones they won't. And honestly, if they don't have it in stock, it's more efficient, frankly, to go home and look it up on Amazon yourself than to ask them to order it for you. There isn't that sort of culture, which I know exists in overseas bookstores. Amazon came to South Africa about 2 years ago, so that's quite new and quite exciting. I know a lot of people don't like shopping on Amazon, but for those of us in the far climes who can't find the book at all, if it's there, it's at least a way to get hold of the book. So that we're grateful for. And then there's a thing I always like to talk about because I like to support it, and that's called Bobshop, which I think is a bit like your eBay idea. But what it is it sells much more than books, but within the bookish part of it, there are mom and pop bookstores around the country. I often think largely built out of people like me who'd suddenly decide to get rid of all their books. And they go onto this thing and they list their books on this site. And the beauty is I can go to one site, look for a book, and access all of these secondhand stores around the country to find the ones I want. I can then put them in a cart and accumulate them, and they've done some logistics deal where the postage is negligible, and they can deliver it to my door within 3 or 4 days. So that's a lifeline. Obviously, you're at the mercy of what some South African has previously read, and therefore, if you're looking for something extremely obscure, you might not find it, or if you're looking for something quickly, you won't find it. But you do find some wonderful stuff. I found, for example, we were talking recently about Graham Greene's essays. That popped up. That's the kind of thing that will be sitting on someone's shelf until either they pass on or they decide to get rid of their books or whatever, and suddenly it's on this thing. So one of my free time activities, I often have BookTube playing on the one screen and trawling through Bobshop on the other screen looking for gems. It's a bit like so that's sort of how it ends up. It is a bit online. I wouldn't be fair to finish the question though without name checking a little independent store in Durban called Ike's Bookstore, IKE, Ike's Bookstore. It's a wonderful one, and I must maybe do a video. I think I should pop down to see them and actually do a video, because it's oldie worldy. Somebody's taken over a house, and I don't know whether there's someone with a trust fund who's just decided they like books enough to do this, because I can't see how the business model works, but it's a joy. It's an absolute joy to go in there. The people are lovely, and it's a hangout place for bookish people in Durban. So yeah, so that it's a bit of a long-winded answer, but that's pretty much a pen sketch of book buying in Durban.
And you mentioned also charity shops connected with animal welfare organizations.
Yes, indeed. Yes. There are two sort of charity things. The one is our what we call the SPCA, the Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, and of course we also have hospice, taking care of the elderly and dying. And both of those charitable organizations here have bookshops, in fact thrift shops, attached to them. Again, they sell more than books. And of course, because we live in a country that has a wide Gini coefficient between the haves and the have-nots, and there's a lot of people struggling, the idea of access to secondhand goods is a whole market here, more than it might be elsewhere. And so I'm often in the store watching people going through secondhand clothes and things, and you really get bargains. That's not what I look for, of course. I'm into the book section, but again, the book prices are ridiculous. You can get 3 or 4 books for a couple of pounds or a couple of dollars. bestsellers. They're dirt cheap. And again, especially, I hate to say it, but especially the case with the hospice, because if the person who's passed on happens to be a book person, there can suddenly be a mother load into the shop, and someone needs to tip you off. But
you shouldn't hesitate to say that, right?
no,
A
no,
bookish
no.
person in hospice, if you draw for them the picture, all right, well, in 3 weeks, you're going to be dead. There's no chance that you're going to live longer than that. But in 6 weeks, 2 of the books on your windowsill there are going to cause someone you don't know to go, ooh. If you were to tell that to a hospice patient, they would be overjoyed.
That may well be true. That may well be true. In fact, you put me in mind of an excuse I used once on the question of can you have too many books? And I made the point that if I'm buying books from an animal rescue, am I not in fact rescuing books? And is this not giving the book a second life? And is that not as good as the fact that the 3 dogs of mine you saw just now are also rescue animals? I'm in the rescue business here, books or animals.
Mm-hmm. Well, we can move on. Before we move on, I will add slightly resentfully that much like in some parts of South Africa, the extensive oral storytelling tradition here at Hyde Cottage is also likewise sometimes scanted by guests who come here and at 3 in the morning no longer want the oral storytelling.
Yes.
Just a little bit of a sore spot. We'll move on to Randy Ray, the literate Texan, who says,
Wonderful.
what book or books first inspired your love of reading?
Okay, another fantastic channel. I just love Randy. I think he and I share some medical challenges in our histories, which sort of makes us kindred spirits in a way, but he's lovely. I think to answer the question about inspired my first reading, I sort of struggle to remember a sort of moment, a seismic moment when it all happened. But as I have mentioned before, my mother was an English teacher, and her mother, my grandmother, was Durban's chief city librarian. So my childhood was often sitting in a circle of kids in a library, having someone read a story to us in what I think they call story circle or story ring or one of those sort of terms. So, I mean, I was listening to, Robin Hood and Beatrix Potter and Long John Silver before I knew how to read myself. And the bug caught. I was very keen to get into the driver's seat. I wanted to actually not be dependent on someone reading to me. So I got into reading via that route very quickly. So I don't have an absolute specific book, but I think it was a process where I was destined to be a lover of books.
So you knew what reading was before you could read?
Yes, I think it's certainly storytelling, in the sense that I mean, as an English teacher, my mother, I remember growing up with picture books I knew Woden and Thor as images in books before I knew that there was such a thing as Norse mythology. Do you know what I mean? I was steeped in books about teaching. And my mother was an English teacher. I don't know whether you saw, but I referenced in the Secret Santa thing we did recently, I gifted virtually to Pat at Book Chat with Pat a copy of a book called Frankie and Stanky by Barbara Torpedo, who's a local Durban author. And the reason I did it is that my mother is a character in the book. So she's the only teacher in the book whose name was not changed. All the other teachers in the book, the names were changed to protect the guilty. But my mother, who emerges very well from this because she used to read Pride and Prejudice to the class. Yeah. It's there was no way I wasn't going to end up loving books and reading.
Okay, so you wanted to read before you could. Oh, yeah. Amazing. That is incredible. Oh my. Okay, but what about in the spirit of Randy's question, what about later than that? You're talking the very origins. But what about, well, actually, if it dovetails with your earlier answer about never rereading, I was going to ask, what about later books, specific books that genuinely sunk their hook in? So not as you're learning what books are or what reading is, but once you know.
Well,
but there weren't any of those either? None that you go back to all the time?
Well, not that I go back to, because strangely enough, I wonder whether, having been slightly spoilt by having, a mother and a grandmother who was so bookish, perhaps I wasn't even aware of the process that was going on in terms of becoming. It was just growing up. This is what everybody did, It's a bit like I thought everyone could sing until I stood in the school choir and suddenly thought this guy behind me is not doing very well. But I think what happened is that, of course, as life happened and you get to school and then your reading is prescribed, and, you read what they tell you to read in terms of books, which I actually did enjoy. I loved Adam Bede, and I read Tale of Two Cities, although there I did work out that if you read the first couple of pages and the last couple of pages, you got a pretty decent shot of persuading people that you read the book. but that's another story. And then I think sort of as a teenager, I got into Agatha Christie. And we got into Agatha Christie as a family. I've got two brothers and a sister, and we all got into Agatha Christie as a family, and it became an obsession. Everyone was finding all the books, and we sort of eventually ended up with all, I think it's 88, if we counted once, of the Agatha Christie books. So I would plow through those endlessly and love them. And again, that's not the sort of thing you would really go back and reread necessarily. And then a little bit later, I got into Frederick Forsyth. I read The Day of the Jackal and absolutely loved it. And then it was, the Odessa File and The Dogs of War and the ones that came after, The Devil's Alternative, etc. So I went through a spate where that was pretty much all I read because I liked it so much. And then I think I sort of hit the stage where life gets in the way. You've got career, you've got work, you've got family, and my reading dropped very significantly there back to, a couple of books a year type of thing. And I read the Da Vinci Code because everybody read the Da Vinci Code. You know what I mean? And I remember at the time, it wasn't horrible. I didn't hate it. I have since worked out, by the way, that all his books are exactly the same formula. Only the character names change. And in fact, I wrote a blog many, many years ago about how to write a Dan Brown novel, but that's another story. So that's the way I've sort of come up through reading. And I'm very conscious, and that's part of the thinking behind Riff Raff's Reading Renaissance, is that I haven't gone through the step of reading all the really great stuff. I've sort of bumped up against it osmosisly, if that's a word, but there's big chunks missing. And that's what's really behind this thing I'm doing. It's not blindly classics only, because as you can see from what I read, I'll deviate. I read lots of local politics just to keep up, and I'm very happy to read new stuff if it's interesting and potentially good. That's always a bit of a hit and miss. The last couple of years, and I think it's driven by life events, but the last couple of years I've become very conscious of time being finite, and therefore if you want to do this, get on and do it now. And I think BookTube's just sort of added fuel to that fire to say, let's actually make reading the number one thing that you do other than, the things you have to do.
Every time somebody on BookTube mentions this whole thing about life getting in the way, I always wonder why you all indulge in having this life thing. It sounds very inconvenient. Why would you do it?
It often happens before you discover the books, you see.
Well, we can move on here to Books Do Things to Me. This is Angelina with a hard G. Is that Angelina?
Yeah, Angelina. That's right. That's right. Angelina she's a Russian reader who lives in Slovenia. So go ahead with her question.
Who is the author you have read the most books from?
Well, I guess probably, as I mentioned just now, it's probably Agatha Christie, just on sheer weight of numbers, because we did collect all 88 books, and if you didn't know what to read next, that's what you grabbed, whether it was 450 from Paddington or, Sad Cypress or whatever it was. There was always, it was a shelf of books of every little paperback from Agatha Christie you can imagine. So probably that.
But Agatha Christie is famously prolific. What about a normal author, where you, having read everything they've written, would be more about them than about their bibliography?
Maybe Frederick Forsyth then. I know I've mentioned it already, but I read The Day of the Jackal completely unsuspectingly, and I really was taken. I remember specifically.
Day of the Jackal will do it.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I remember specifically.
I just recently reread it and was amazed by how good it is.
It's fantastic, and the bit about where he smuggles a disassembled gun through Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport. I mean, I've been often through Charles de Gaulle Airport, and I know how it works. And when you read the book, you think, my goodness, he could have actually done this. And did he do it? Did he stress test his theory? It's that level. If I'm not mistaken, Steve, I think Frederick Forsyth may take the credit for creating the genre called faction, where fiction and fact are so closely merged. I think he created that. And certainly, look, I don't think everybody loves his books, but if you love them, you love them. And I just find that I'm a guy where if the writer is taking liberties with possibilities, I get irritated. If he's claiming things, like I find Dan Brown actually quite irritating in the sense that a lot of what he says happened in the book physically could not have happened because Leonardo wasn't alive at the time this happened, and that kind of thing. It does irritate me because I end up worrying about fake news and worrying about which bits I could trust. But with Forsyth, you talk about brands, eh? Forsyth brand is that, it's like reportage. It really happened. It really could have happened. Let's put it that way.
I had that question forever and ever, decades and decades ago. When I first read Day of the Jackal, one of my first questions about it was, did this guy actually try this? And I was thinking, well, it would be an enormous risk. When he wrote this book, he wasn't yet Frederick Forsyth, so he would have faced 45 years in jail.
Yes,
and I thought, what an enormous risk. And then I thought, well, but the assassin, the jackal, takes risks too. That would be part of you simulating it. I don't think there's no doubt in my mind that he tried it.
Yeah. At the risk of asking Steve, have you read it, Steve? Have you read Frederick Forsyth's autobiography, The Outsider?
Yes.
Because that I've recently read, and what I loved about it was that as you read his life story, you can see where the genesis of each book came from.
Yes, you can map the book.
Yeah, and it's wonderful. Having read them all, I found it wonderful. And I believe it's true that when a certain coup in Africa, I forget which country it was, when the coup was overthrown and all the mercenaries were arrested, 3 of them had copies of the Dogs of War in their luggage. And there was a theory that it might have been the battle plan.
I definitely believe the rumor that Paris security forces were told to read Day of the Jackal. I definitely believe that as a rumor. That makes perfect sense. Yeah. We move on to Julie. What is the one book by a South African author you wish others would read to better understand your country?
Fantastic question. I love Julie. She's a great. I see her popping up on all the live streams. Okay, there's two answers I think I need to give to this question, because the first one, if you've never read anything about South Africa, you really do need to read Nelson Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom, which is the sort of definitive book that describes the history of the struggle and right up to the point of the democratic elections and first the freedom in 1990. In the 1990s. So that would be a starting point for someone who doesn't know much about current South Africa. I'm not really going back into the long history of South Africa, more about why it is how it is today is what I presume is behind the question. So that's the first sort of serious read, and it's a bloody good read. So I think I would not hesitate to recommend that. And then on much more contemporary, as in a book that won the Booker Prize in 2021, is Damon Galgut's book, The Promise. Now, I'm constantly punting this to the point of becoming tiring, I imagine. But the point about Galgut's book that I like is it covers a 4-decade period pretty much up to now. So if you're someone like me who grew up and lived through both apartheid and the change, this book is exactly square center on that period. And the premise of the book is brilliant, where it's an Afrikaans family, and his ability to capture the zeitgeist of Afrikaans families is unparalleled. I've never seen anyone capture it so well in a book. And there are 4 deaths. That's not a spoiler. It's pretty evident when you read the book. There are 4 deaths in the family, each happening a decade apart. So each decade starts with a funeral and broadens out into catching you up with what has happened in the decade to the family, to the people around them who are affected by the family, and to the country in the broader sense. And it also maps the 4 presidents that have happened in South Africa's history during that period. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Let me just say that and then leave it at that. But all of that to me makes it a quintessential South African book. And over and above that, I haven't even got into the brilliance of Damon Galgut's writing, because, sometimes I love books not so much because of the story, but a little bit about what the actual writer does to me, the reader, physically by reading the book. And Damon Galgut is an incredibly creative writer. I mean, if I tell you that in a single sentence, you can shift protagonist, you can shift scene, and you can shift time period, all in one sentence. And he does that in a way that at first you think, what the hell's going on? Am I right? I have to reread this. But by the end of the book, what he is achieving, and this is hard to describe to people who don't live here, he creates the tension by doing that and the uncertainty that is part of the slight tension that runs forever in this country. This is an incredibly beautiful country. It's a wonderful place to live, but it has a complicated and troubled history, and not all of that history has gone away. Not all of the issues are resolved. So there is always, I mean, if I tell you that in the last, what was it, 3 or 4 years ago, we had unrest and riots in this country of serious degree. So that's that underlying tension that people who live here are aware of and understand and learn to live with is captured in the book through the physical writing process. And that I've never seen done before. When I saw this won the Booker Prize, I was not at all surprised. I don't know enough about the Booker Prize, Steve, you probably do, but to know whether that means anything. I've heard, I think Mark from Book Time with Elvis says he's not overly impressed with the prizes. That doesn't mean much. But to me, so to answer the question without being more long-winded than I've already been, if you want a serious informational journey of Nelson Mandela's walk to freedom, literally from incarceration up to becoming the president, you can't beat The Long Walk to Freedom. And if you want a current book that says what's it feel like here, what's really going on, what's working, what's not working, Damon Galgut's The Promise is fantastic. And beyond that, of course, I've got this rather daunting project I've given myself called Read the Beloved Country, which there's so much good literature here to read. I know I've said to Steve before, and I think I've said on the channel, the story of this country is so wrought and angst-ridden and full of bad stuff and good and bad people that it creates an incredibly fertile ground for storytelling. It's endless. I think movie makers are starting to realize that, and they're starting to revisit some of the stories.
I have a million questions. I have to control that. We'll mention, I'll pursue 2 of my million questions. Is Damon Galgut South African?
Yes.
Okay, so Damon Galgut, South African, famous author, won the Booker Prize. You're saying that if he got into a taxi cab in a South African city, the chances are overwhelming that the taxi cab not only wouldn't know who he was, but wouldn't care?
They wouldn't know who he was. They wouldn't have heard of the book. No, that is unfortunately true. I think he's a much more famous person outside the country. Look, there is obviously a small literary circle here, but it's small. It's, certainly he would not be recognized if he walked down the street. No question.
Okay, and my second question is you mentioned this incredibly vibrant historical reality, as negative as it is, that generates all sorts of literature. What about non-English literature? Is there a Zulu press in South Africa? In Durban, is there a Zulu press? Are there Zulu authors who don't even get translated?
I don't know about don't get translated. I think most of them do, because the bulk of books sold in this country will be in English. So if you want to tap into the market, I think you pretty much need to be translated. I mean, if you look back far enough, there's Credo Mutwa's book. I'm trying to remember the name.
I have to think there's some native Africans who don't want to write their books in their colonizer's language.
Well, I think obviously books get written in all languages, but I think there's a commercial side to it. It's exactly the same, if I could draw the parallel with Afrikaans writers, because even in the dark days of apartheid, there were quite a handful of Afrikaans writers who were writing protest literature. Andre Brink is a name that springs to mind, who was writing novels telling the story of what's wrong with the system and the situation. And those books would be written in Afrikaans, but of course, in order to make them accessible, not just to English-speaking South Africans, but to the world. That was also part of the point, is that the world needed to know what the locals wanted to tell you about what's really going on here versus the censorship rules that were trying to ban and repress those books. So translation into English is almost a given in terms of the process of publishing books here. I mean,
I wonder
if
how
I
grudging it is.
say again.
I wonder if it's a grudging process. I wonder if some of those authors don't want they recognize the necessity, but they don't like it. I know that was true with, for instance, Jewish authors in America, some of whom wanted to write in Hebrew or Yiddish,
Yeah,
and it's definitely true with some Irish writers who tell their publishers, "I don't want this brought into English.
yeah.
That's the
I
last
mean,
language I want it brought into. Bring it into Chinese if you want, but not into
yeah.
English."
I mean,
And their
if I think,
publishers always tell them, "Well, you want your words read, don't you?"
yeah, that's the point. If I think about books that are floating around for my Read the Beloved Country project, this is Zakes Mda. Now, Zakes Mda is a well-known, very successful author, but his books are all available in English. I don't know for a fact whether I think he writes them in English, to be honest. I'm not sure about that. And then this one, I've just pulled a pile here. This one's called Coconut, which is written by Kopano Matlawa, tricky name, but this is about two young girls growing up privileged, black girls growing up privileged, and therefore going to what would be called colloquially a white school, which means an ex-white school, now integrated, but still at a higher level of social, in the same way as I'm sure even in any country you've got schools and schools. Some are better equipped in better neighborhoods than others. And this term coconut means exactly what it says, sort of brown on the outside and questioning, is it white on the inside? It's that coconut is a term used here not very favorably for people who aren't
Yes.
identifying as they should. But that's the
We
kind
have
of,
an equivalent term here in the United States. That's
sure.
and it breaks my heart because
Yeah.
it's a thing. It's a kind of food that I really like, but it's also a
Okay.
very derogative term. It's for the
Yeah.
exact same thing. Black on
And
the
I mean,
outside, white on the inside.
here, for example, is Sol Plotcher. I don't know. I don't think the camera will get that. It's Sol, and his surname is Plaatje. This is the first English language novel written by a black man in South Africa. And he also has, which I have somewhere, his book out there it is. He has a non-fiction book called Native Life in South Africa, which again was the first time someone had documented what life was really like for black people in South Africa. So, I mean, I think that English is the gateway to get the message to whoever you're trying to get to. I think that's the bottom line.
Your status as a senior citizen is showing. The camera is not you. It's not going to focus better the closer you shove something to it. If you just tap, you will give it an opportunity to autofocus, which you can no longer do.
Yeah, I think if I tap this camera, it's probably going to go crashing. Everything. If you saw the backside view of this thing, you'd get vertigo, I think. But anyway, so
Your
that's a
eyesight was
long answer.
your eyesight was a lot sharper when you were the rumored third member of Wham. Is that correct? That's what Reddit says.
I
In your
hate to
big
say it,
hair
but
era?
I hate to say it, but I have hit an age where my eyesight is sort of frustratingly movable. Those who watch my videos will see me do this all the
You
time,
do it all
you
the
know.
time.
And I mean, some of my friends are saying, "Go and get the bloody bifocals." But to me, I find when I'm reading, the book comes quite close. I remember a time not that long ago when I had to push the book away. So I don't know what the heck's going on. But anyway, as long as I could see to read, because I must say that's a terrifying thought. I thought the thought of losing the ability to see the words on the page. Wow, that's a scary
Yes.
one. Anyway,
Yeah. It's a dodge that's coming your way. We'll hope that you get through it. I remember when I was your age, I didn't think about it at all.
yeah,
But there's a thing called macular degeneration that
yeah.
happens regardless of your eyesight
Funny
type,
enough,
regardless of your.
I know macular degeneration quite well because my mother actually suffered from it. And there's a nice story that one of the surgeons here was doing experimental laser surgery and wanted volunteer patients. And my mother was a little old, retired school teacher, so she didn't have funding to go and do expensive operations. And they did both her eyes for free as part of this experiment. And it gave her another good 10 years of reading, which was
Wow.
fantastic, you know.
Oh my.
Yeah,
Well,
so
and also, I'm not the biggest fan of them, but audiobooks have changed that completely for
of
people.
course, they would be that's where all our criticism of is it reading, is it not, they all go
That's
out
where
the
it goes
window.
away. Right. That's
Yeah,
where it has to go away, is that
yeah.
you
God
45
bless the
years
audio.
ago, you had no options along those lines.
Yeah, That's very
45
true.
years ago or 145 years ago in Trollope and Dickens, when you lost your eyesight, you hoped that you had your girl
Mm.
to sit and read to you.
In
If
fact,
you were,
it's one of the things I've often thought about if I reach a stage where I have more time on my hands than I know what to do with, which is a nice thought. We had an organization here, which I haven't looked up for a while, so I hope it's still there, called Tape Aids for the Blind. I don't know if it's an international idea, it may be, but the idea is that readers like you and I would sit in a little studio and read the book to tape. So it's like an amateur version of the audiobook that you buy on Amazon. And of course, being amateur, it's unpaid and therefore much cheaper. And it makes recordings of books by not by Kenneth Branagh or somebody of that ilk, but by you and me who have at least the ability to read clearly enough.
there's a huge function called LibriVox that does that. It's all
Oh,
volunteer,
right.
and
Oh, right.
they're all well done. It's a huge number of
Yes,
books, and it's
yes.
free.
I confess I'm a bit dated here because I actually did some volunteer work for them in my youth, well, my sort of young adulthood, where I did read a few things. They weren't books; they were sort of plays and things that they specifically wanted a young person to read. I did some of that, but then, of course, again, life and career and everything made it too busy, so I didn't continue. So anyway, but we've waffled on a lot about South Africa.
Yes. Let's move on to Derek Green.
Yep.
Derek Green asks, have you read Wilbur Smith? And if so, what's your favorite book of his? I'm curious about how well known he is in Africa.
Right. Well, let me say, I personally have not, but I'm probably the only reader in South Africa who hasn't read Wilbur Smith. He's massively popular in South Africa. Yeah, to the extent that, for example, he would probably have his own bookshelf in the store, like Tom Clancy or James Patterson. Anybody who is a reader of the sort of mainstream stuff in this country would be very big on Wilbur Smith. My wife likes Wilbur Smith because he writes about the outdoors and the nature. And I know there's a book she got recently called Elephant Song, which is about the hunting of elephants. So my wife has a thing about it, a positive thing about elephants. So I'm the wrong guy to ask about Wilbur Smith, but I can tell you he's massive. He's probably better. Let me put it this way: he's better known to the South African public than Alan Paton, who wrote probably the most literally valid book about this country.
It surprises me a little, though.
Why?
Because, I mean, some of Wilbur Smith's earlier novels are very much Darkest Africa. Maybe he grew out of that. Maybe I'm just not familiar with his later books enough to know whether or not he seems to me to be the type of writer that
would go out
South
of
Africa
fashion.
would go out of fashion. I mean,
Don't
look at
forget-
Elephant Song. Elephant Song's a perfect example. These wise, intelligent, noble animals. Isn't it fun to blow their heads apart?
But again, he's a little bit like John Gordon Davis. I think that those don't forget that a lot of your book buyers in this country are still white people, because of the small percentage of the total population that's buying books. Obviously, it's changing with time, the demographics shifting, but there are still people who are buying books and they might know that their parents like this book or whatever. Those sort of things tend, as in my case, you tend to learn your reading habits from the generation before.
So does your wife like his ancient Egypt books?
I don't know. My wife's a school teacher, so she doesn't get a lot of time to read. And when she does read, I think she wants to read for relaxation. So it's probably a little bit more in the sort of lighter area reading than some of that.
I'm always curious to know what happens to an author's fan base when they do that, when they have a thing that they do,
and
then they decide to do something very different. Does the fan base go with them? Does the fan base increase? In Ken Follett's case, it increased when he moved to historical fiction. He actually gained hundreds of thousands more readers than he had for his thrillers. And I always wonder about that with Wilbur Smith, where he leaves Africa behind. Well, not technically, you're still in Egypt, but goes back thousands of years to write about ancient Egypt. I gather from the number of sequels that those books must be popular. I just wonder if they're popular with his fans.
I don't know, but I think he's still a successful commercial proposition. Let's put it that way.
We move on to Heather Gregg. What are the books on the tables behind you?
I knew this was coming.
The number one signature thing. Everybody has a signature thing on their channel, and yours is your imminent death by book. Are those books your TBR, or books you're reading, or the overflow from your already full bookshelves, or random set dressing borrowed from another booktube?
Well, it's a fair question. I've touched a little bit on the backstory already about this is the room in the house, which is mine and full of all my junk. So, to some extent and to a large extent, it's books that don't fit on the bookcases. There is a space behind me on this wall, which is, I'm toying with whether there needs to be another big bookcase there, which would help. But I want to avoid any feeling that it's chaos. It's not chaos at all. The books are in piles, and I'm very, yeah, Steve laughing because he doesn't believe me, but
No one believes you. It's not just me. No one believes you. You are the guy surrounded by empty beer cans saying I can stop anytime I want. No one is going, when you say, you of all people say these books are not chaos, no one is going to believe that.
Well, yeah, if we had time and mobile cameras, I could walk you through the piles. But in
So
fact,
you're saying the piles do make sense.
Oh, yes, they make absolute sense. I mean, you saw me just now. I reached back into the pile and pull things out. I know where things are.
The signature Riff Raff's reach.
Yeah. The truth is, I mean, my background and training is in finance, which makes me an inveterate organizer of things. I don't like disorder. You might laugh because it looks like disorder, but it's not. It's very much organized chaos. There's a question someone asked later, I think it was James, about how I sort my library, and I couldn't work out if it was a serious question or a ironic, humorous question.
It's no offense to you, but I don't think anyone listening believes that.
Fair either way. But honestly, if you go back and look carefully at my past videos, you will see that this mountain behind me is constantly moving, and it's not the same.
Changing. Yes.
Yeah, and the idea is that books come in and then books get sorted into piles. I will admit the problem right now is there aren't enough shelf space for books, and therefore there are piles on this desk. But they are very much purpose piles. Obviously, the front couple of piles are the ones that are either coming into the next YouTube video or just come out of the last YouTube video. So that's a sort of queuing system. But there are piles of histories, then there's piles of South African literature, and it's not random chaos. I do assure you of that fact. I've still got the challenge of how to film the solution, but I think the solution has to wait until the bookcase appears.
That's what I was going to ask, because I'm sure that a lot of booktubers are going to want to know if you decide to get those other speakers behind you.
Yeah.
If you decide to get those out of there and free that wall for a bookcase, first I want to know, and I'm sure a lot of other nosy people want to know, where would you get that bookcase?
Well, there is a store in Durban these bookcases are all pine, and it's a treated pine that's relatively cheap. And the store is called Mysteries. It's an Indian surname. We have a large Indian population. We have the second largest Indian population in the world outside India, living in Durban, because of the history of the importation of cane slaves. But there's a firm called Mysteries who specialize in all manner of furniture, but in pine. Everything's made of pine, beds, bookcases, etc. And it's not unreasonably priced. So you can go to them, they've got catalogs, and you measure the space and you work out how many you could fit in. And yeah, so it's not difficult to organize. I'll need to just find the slot for it on the budget. And the political fallout, perhaps, of prioritizing a bookcase over some of the things that might be on the family's list of urgent priorities. But yeah, other than that, we would be good to go.
During this Q&A, I can extract from you a promise that when that happens, you will film it.
The only constraint about filming it is I need to work out exactly how, because most of my filming is done with a static camera in an easy place. I need to work out how to get around, because remember I said there's no room to swing a cat in this place. You're literally stepping over things. So, the roving cameraman will fall on his ass and be in trouble. But subject to that, yes, it would be such a seismic event in my BookTube life that I couldn't possibly not film it.
No, you couldn't just one day show up and have books behind you there. No way.
Yeah.
But okay, before we move on, one last question about that, because of course the way people organize their books is endlessly fascinating to me. Let's say you snap your fingers and you have a floor-to-ceiling big bookcase filling that whole area behind you right now, and you're going to fill it with books. would that affect the chaos on your table? Or would
Yes,
the not chaos, the organized chaos on your table?
no,
Or
no,
would
I
that...
think no, I think it would. It would get more of the books into more organized spaces. I have books of sort of fictional paperbacks, which would be better sorted into shelves by author, by surname. You know, I think I could get, I think I could get a granularity of sorting that's greater than what I've got now. Just
But
because
it
now I'm
sounds like from
constrained
what
by.
you're saying, it sounds like there would still be piles of books on your table.
Well, only
Active
work
books,
in
so to speak.
progress. Yeah. There'd be a small pile. There probably wouldn't be the sort of Table Mountain and type of.
Oh my! Oh, every one of these questions could be an hour.
Yes, I feel.
We'll move on to Joseph Francis Burton.
Yep.
Name some of your favorite musical lyricists whose work can make a great poetry on their own.
Ah.
And of course, Steve is trembling here, worrying that you're going to say Bob Dylan. But we'll move on. Give an example. Bonus points if you sing. I'm assuming he's asking you to sing and not me. And also, based on one of your past videos, I already know one of your favorites.
Okay, Joseph Francis Burton is one of the very, very few people who reacted positively to my attempt at Poetry Thursday, when I took a lyric from a song by Jethro Tull. As you all know from my channel, I'm the world's biggest Jethro Tull fan, but I presented it as a poem. It's called Heavy Horses, and it's about the heavy workhorses of England. It sunk like a lead balloon for most of BookTube,
but when you do this video, when you do your editing magic, will you link to that video? Because those of you who are watching, it was magic. It was absolute magic.
I will link to it indeed.
It was magnificent deconstruction of a poem, regardless of the fact you suddenly realize, oh, wait, this is really, really good. And then 10 minutes in, you realize, well, this is about a Jethro Tull lyric. It was incredible.
That was actually the trick I was trying to pull, is to make the point that not all lyrics are by definition not qualifying as poetry. But Joseph Francis Burton is a Jethro Tull fan, so I think I was on home ground, if you like. But I thought about this question because I feel very passionately about this, and swords may be drawn here, Steve, in terms of your Bob Dylan comment. But let me start with my childhood, because I wanted to reach back again and pull out this book, which is the Gilbert and Sullivan Companion, because I grew up with Gilbert and Sullivan, as you could probably imagine. And now my brother, I must give a shout out to my brother from England, who brought out all the Jethro Tull books, if you watched that video, because he actually belongs in England. He's a teacher in England, and he belongs to a Gilbert and Sullivan society that puts on Gilbert and Sullivan every year. And so he's the bigger Gilbert and Sullivan fan than I am. But I grew up with Gilbert and Sullivan as part of my reading, and I messaged him when I saw this question to say, tell me what is the best lyric in the whole of Gilbert and Sullivan, because he's done them all year after year. They do different ones, and he pulled out from the Yeoman of the Guard this little passage that I want to read you. So now the glasses are going to come off typically so that I can see what I'm doing. This is the Jack Frost, the jester. Is it Jack Frost? Jack? Oh, let me not embarrass myself. Tell you right now, it is Jack Point, not Jack Frost. So Jack Point, the jester, is talking to others about making a career as a jester. And he says here, if you wish to succeed as a jester, you'll need to consider each person's auricular. What is all right for B would quite scandalize C, for C is very particular, and D may be dull, and E's very thick skull is as empty as brains of a ladle, while F is F sharp, and will cry with a carp that he's known your best jokes from his cradle. So that kind of lyrics, just because lyrics are contained within music and even within the constraints of music, to me doesn't mean they can't qualify as something as worthy as words written in the poetry format. That's the one. It gets worse, Steve, because indeed, the book you take issue was this book is Why Dylan Matters. And you picked this, I believe, as the worst book of the year it came out. I forget which year it was, but your best and worst lists is qualified for a worst list. So I'm not going to delve into this book because you've already dismissed it, but I am going to delve into the Bob Dylan lyrics book. Some very short examples, I hope. Yeah, Steve, if you need a comfort break, this would be the moment to do it, while I simply inflict on people. One of my favorite Dylan songs is My Back Pages, which is the song about how when we're young, we know everything, and as we grow older, we realize that we don't. And the lines go as follows. Half-wrecked prejudice leaped forth, ripped down all hate I screamed. Lies that life is black and white, spoke from my skull I dreamed. Romantic facts of musketeers, foundationed deep somehow. Ah, but I was so much older then, I'm younger than that now. I mean, to me, that is as good as anything that is written without music in the background. And from Desolation Row. Praise be to Nero's Neptune, the Titanic sails at dawn, and everybody shouting, which side are you on? And Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot fighting in the captain's tower, while calypso singers laugh at them and fishermen hold flowers. Between the windows of the sea, where lovely mermaids flow, and no one has to think too much about Desolation Row. We're nearly there, Steve. We're nearly there.
The BookTube is rejoicing right now. I swear, they're all cheering at the screen because you are reading Bob Dylan lyrics to me. They are loving that more than anything.
I appreciate your forbearance, Steve. We're nearly there.
Mermaids don't flow. Mermaids are not liquid. They don't flow. Why are sailors holding flowers?
Poetic license, Steve. Poetic license. Okay. One of my favorite Bob Dylans, and I'm sure many of the people out there, Tangled Up in Blue, he's talking about the various experiences he's had moving through life. And there's this little one here that goes, I lived with them on Montague Street in a basement down the stairs. There was music in the cafes at night and revolution in the air. Then he started into dealing with slaves and something inside of him died. She had to sell everything she owned and froze up inside. But when finally the bottom fell out, I became withdrawn. The only thing I knew how to do was to keep on keeping on, like a bird that flew, tangled up in blue. You can't tell me that's not poetic, Steve. You might
Birds
not like
that get tangled up in something are no longer keeping on. And also, basement down the stairs as opposed to what? The basement upstairs?
But if you applied the same rigid standards to the novels you read, no one would be allowed to write anything.
No one in any novel that I've ever read locates a staircase, a basement upstairs. No one that I read needs to specify. That was done for a dumb, clunky rhythm. Instead of I don't know, maybe sitting for a minute and thinking of something else the way Joan Baez would have done.
Talking of clunky rhythms, reminding me of something I read about Homer, where he would use different phrases to fit the rhythm of the line. So maybe he's in trouble too. All right, last
you're all getting your money's worth because he's not only reading Dylan to me, he's comparing Dylan to Homer. So you're all getting your money's worth. I wouldn't be surprised if you're at 800 subscribers by now.
I will tell you that people were comparing Dylan to Homer in the Nobel Literature Prize speech, which he was awarded. But let's not go there because I know we're not going to agree on that. One last shot from Bob Dylan, because this is in fact my favorite Bob Dylan song of all time. And it's very special to me. It's called Blind Willie McTell. And Blind Willie McTell was in fact one of the sort of Louisiana musicians. So it's an homage to a previous musician. Why it's special to me is I've always loved it. I think it's the best Bob Dylan song. It has piano and guitar in the most amazing coordination. I'll put a link to it down below. You can watch it on YouTube, except Steve, who won't want to. But the beauty of this is Dylan describing how Blind Willie McTell, as a lyricist, could capture the stories of the slavery from the South, unlike anyone else he's ever met. That's what the lyric is about. So I'll read it to you now. Well, I heard that hoot owl singing as they were taking down the tents. The stars above the barren trees were his only audience. Them charcoal gypsy maidens can strut their feathers well, but nobody can sing the blues like Blind Willie McTell. See them big plantations burning, hear the cracking of the whips, smell the sweet magnolia blooming, see the ghost of slavery's ships. I can hear the tribes a moaning, hear the undertaker's bell, but nobody can sing the blues like Blind Willie McTell. You can't tell me that's not moving, Steve.
you can't keep rhetorically saying you can't say that's bad if I'm not allowed. Of course that's bad. The narrator of the song continues to say that no one can say these things like blind Millie Mattel, but he's the one saying them. The narrator of the song is intentionally positioning himself as superior to the man he claims to be praising. And why? Because the man he claims to be praising is black. I hate this guy with every fiber of my being. I can indeed say that is terrible. It is author posturing masquerading as humility.
I'm thinking now of James Francis Burton, who I suspect is loving the friction that we've stirred up here, because that tends to be his style of approach.
This just to get meta for a moment, BookTube is loving this little particular exchange for a number of reasons. Not only the friction, but also the joy, the vicarious joy of having someone reading Dylan to me, but also probably most of all the fact that we can have a blast disagreeing.
Yes, absolutely.
Does not exist in many places left in the world. And here, whether I'm bashing Alex Serrano for loving Stephen King or whether it's this, it doesn't matter. It's fun, and that's wonderful. That can be a bomb. So,
for what it's worth, I'm with you on Stephen King, but that's another debate. I'm trying to sort of smooth the water now, but I want to move on, because if it's not Dylan, the other lyricist that I really believe is fantastic is Paul Simon.
Well, here you go. All you had to do was do that. He's brilliant.
And I've got two choices I want to read out here, because that's what I do on my channel, is I read out all the time. The one is an obscure early Paul Simon song called Duncan. This is just about the itinerant musician going from hotel to hotel room and trying to make a go of it, and it's tough. But it goes as follows. Couple in the next room, bound to win a prize. They've been going at it all night long. Well, I'm trying to get some sleep, but these motel walls are cheap. Lincoln Duncan is my name, and here's my song. My father was a fisherman, my mother was a fisherman's friend, and I was born in the boredom and the chowder. And then when I reached my prime, I left home in the Maritimes, headed down the turnpike for New England, sweet New England. I just absolutely love the way Paul Simon crafts his lyrics to tell stories.
I agree.
I wanted to. There's another one, and I've only do two from Paul Simon, so we're not too excessive here. Paul Simon's album Graceland is well known, but on it he wrote the song Graceland, which is quite poignant because it's about him and his son traveling to Graceland, which of course is the home of Elvis Presley. But that son comes from his marriage to Carrie Fisher, the Star Wars Carrie Fisher, who had just broken up. So he was fresh in the grief of that broken relationship when he wrote Graceland. And I want to read you the passage that's about Carrie Fisher, because I think this is also beautiful. It says, "She comes back to tell me she's gone, as if I didn't know that, as if I didn't know my own bed, as if I'd never noticed the way she brushed her hair from her forehead. And she said, losing love is like a window in your heart. Everybody sees you're blown apart. Everybody feels the wind blow. I'm going to Graceland." I mean, I'm very moved. I get very moved by that kind of writing.
Might I point out, since I know she's watching, Taylor Swift, that's how you write a breakup song. Okay.
Yes, indeed. So I trust
I could listen to you read his lyrics forever. Just forever.
Thank you. I trust we've given Joseph Francis Burton enough of an answer, so perhaps we should move on.
Yes, indeed. To Gareth, Book of Songs and Other Magic, who naturally wants to know what are the three best music concerts.
Okay. Well, I'll try and be a little briefer than I was on the previous one. Obviously, Jethro Tull is going to top the list because they've come once to South Africa. I saw them twice when I was living in Holland, so that's three. And if I was only allowed three, that might be the top three. But let's count it as one. Next would be Paul Simon, but there's a story attached to this because Paul Simon was the first artist internationally to return to South Africa after the cultural boycott ended as we were going through the political changes in the 90s. And he came with what was called the Born at the Right Time tour, which was a lovely name for the tour. And I actually, at the time, was running the Durban Folk Club, the music club here. And because of the history, which you can Google and look up, Paul Simon had got into trouble by recording Graceland because he used South African performers and musicians at a time when the cultural boycott said you weren't allowed to engage with South African musicians at all. And he needed people like Harry Belafonte to smooth the waters with the ANC to not be in terrible trouble. So as a bit of a penance, when he came back to South Africa to do this Born at the Right Time tour, he ran a series of workshops for the music industry. And I, being part of this fledgling little folk club at the time, was part of the music industry. So I got to meet him, which was fantastic. He's the shortest man I've ever met, but probably one of the most impressive in terms of actually engaging with him. And he took us through an amazing background story to the whole concert. I know, for example, that there were 96 microphones on stage, and then I attended the concert, which was of a scale that Durban had just never seen before. He took over the entire rugby stadium, which is massive, probably 80,000 seater. And he had 4 drummers on stage. I mean, the scale of it was fantastic. And of course, this was to support the album called The Rhythm of the Saints, which came after Graceland. Graceland was the one inspired by South African music. Rhythm of the Saints was inspired by Latin American music, which is equally wonderful. Two fantastic albums, if you don't know them. But playing with him in the band were 3 of the legends of South African music. Ray Phiri, spelled Phiri, pronounced Phiri, from a local band called Stimela, which means train, as in steam train. Ray Phiri was on the lead guitar with Paul Simon. Bagiti Khumalo plays bass, and he, in my view, played in one of the Paul Simon songs the best lead run that's ever been played on a bass guitar in the song Diamonds on the Soles of Her Shoes. And I will link below so that you can check it out and challenge me. The lead, you see guitarists doing amazing things with Eric Clapton and people like that. But Bagiti Khumalo does that on a 4-stringed electric bass, which is something most people's fingers could not even begin to think about doing. I challenge you to watch that and tell me you don't think that's the best sort of 30 seconds of bass guitar. I suppose the Jaco Pastorius people will be coming out of the woodwork. But for me,
a couple of other names come to mind as well. Now I'm wondering what Gareth would put.
Yeah, I'd be fascinated. I'd be fascinated to know Gareth's favorite bass guitar run. But for my money, Bagiti Khumalo. And I have to say, in Paul Simon's credit, not a lot of people know this. People like Ray Phiri and Bagiti Khumalo went on to become global stars because of the Paul Simon experience. And later in life, when they became old, I think Bagiti Khumalo has passed on. In fact, I'm pretty sure Ray Phiri has too. Simon was very, very good to them in terms of providing world-class medical attention. And he really did take them into the family. And
their families as well.
Yeah,
support was available for their families as well.
Yeah, so it's a happy story.
Exactly,
and then
the kind of financial support and outreach that Bob Dylan did to. Oh wait, no, he didn't.
Okay,
he just stole the music. That's all he did, was steal the music. He didn't actually do any of that. Oh, okay.
I'm guessing you're not a fan.
Sore.
Okay, and having said 3 South African legends, I must mention Barney Rakabani on sax, because he plays sax and penny whistle, which, if you don't know, is that little tin whistle that's quite unique to South Africa. Quite apart from the South Africans at that concert was Steve Gadd on drums. That's a real name. Michael Brecker on sax, and the late great Richard Tate, who's a chunky African-American pianist. I met him in this workshop. His fingers are like sausages. They are huge. But lest you think he's not very, very special, he's passed on too. Unfortunately, these guys have all passed away now. But he is the guy who wrote for Paul Simon the piano introduction to Bridge Over Troubled Waters. If you go back and listen to, yeah.
Oh, wow. So his connection with some of these people goes back a long way.
Absolutely. Look, I think once you're in the Paul Simon band, you don't bugger off. It's a winner. But I think it's also because I've watched many documentaries on Paul Simon, and he is a consummate musician. It's all about the music, and I think musicians like that. I'm sure Gareth will relate to this comment. But once you find a connection musically, it's like a marriage. You don't want to disconnect.
I always find that fascinating. Some headliners that is not true for. That you get horror stories.
Well,
so I always find it fascinating when you've got one that is the opposite of that. Like, I hear the same thing about Willie Nelson. That once you're part of his band, you don't ever want to leave it.
Yeah. I would agree on Willie Nelson. Look, I think Yeah, one could spend a day talking about this, but look. I think Paul Simon's one of the good guys, and I think on lots of levels. And even talking of that, I'm supposed to pick three concerts. So if Jethro Tull has the top slot and Paul Simon has the second, I'm going to give the third slot to Simon and Garfunkel, who I saw in the early 2000s in Amsterdam, just before I finished working there. This was a venerable Simon and Garfunkel on what I called their pension fund farewell tour. They were doing a Europe tour. And the support act was, wait for it, the Everly Brothers. And in fact, the four of them, the two Everly Brothers and Simon and Garfunkel, got together on stage in the middle between the two bits and played Wake Up Little Susie together. So that's a memory that I simply, being in the right place at the right, talk about born at the right time. If I hadn't been working in Holland, I would have missed that once in a lifetime experience and never seen Simon and Garfunkel live. And this was before Art Garfunkel's voice failed, which unfortunately it now has. But when you closed your eyes in that Amsterdam Le Carré Theatre, it was like listening to them in the 60s. It was unbelievable. Anyway, just two things I added to this question. The worst band I ever saw live was UB40. I'm not going to say any more than that. And my biggest regret, the band I missed or the performance I missed, was Richie Havens, who's the guy who opens the Woodstock movie. The guy sitting at the beginning of the Woodstock movie with a solo guitar playing for hours because everyone else is stuck in traffic. That guy came to Durban because there's a mutual friend of mine who was the sound man at Woodstock, believe it or not, long story. And he came and gave one performance live in Durban, and I missed the damn thing because I was out of town. That's my biggest regret musically. But enough on the music. Perhaps we should return to books.
Well, judging from your age, I would assume that archetypal bands for you, that two of them you haven't mentioned, would be the Police and U2. No concerts for either one of them?
No. I'm trying to think if they came here. Don't forget that some of their era, those who were big in the 80s, South Africa was off limits in the 80s. Only Elton John came and got into terrible trouble, and they all used to go to Sun City, which I know you know the Sin City link, Steve. But yeah, so that might explain it. But I'm not a lover of huge crowds. Therefore,
okay. Well,
no, I would go if someone came who was top notch. I mean, if Dire Straits had come, I would have gone to see Dire Straits because I'm a big fan of theirs. But anyway, that's the selection. But there it is.
So you've never seen Gareth?
I've never seen Gareth live, but I have enjoyed the stuff he posts. I'm not one of those subscribers he says always leaves when he puts music on his channel. I like watching him, and he and his band are pretty nice. I tell you what, they're pretty good stuff.
Oh, okay. We move on to James Holder, who goes for comedy as always by asking, "How do you organize your library?"
Okay, I'm glad you asked this. I'm fond of James's channel. There is, in fact, a system. So I'm going to tell you the system. There are sort of 10 categories, and number one is fiction, A to Z by author surname. So I have a large bookcase in the corner, the one that has those big Heinemann books on the top of it, Steve, and that contains literally authors from A to as close to Z as I can. There's a little spillage on Z into the next category, but so fiction is basically by author because that's the quickest way to find anything. Then there's a separate section which I loosely call ancient works, and I use that term loosely because in there I've got the Bible, I've got the Quran, I've got the works of the ancient Greeks, the Romans, Chaucer, Shakespeare, all that kind of stuff, because it's designed to let me find the particular book I'm looking for quickly. So they're all sort of grouped in a section. Then, of course, there's music, which is massive, and there's subsections there. There's classical music, biographies specifically of musicians, the history of music and sort of analytical stuff. There's some wonderful books on how music works and where it's been. There's a section on catalogs and references, like I've got the books that tell you what the top of the charts was in 1948 and all that kind of stuff. And then I have an entire shelf of 34 books on Jethro Tull. So that'll tell you how. I bet you didn't know there were 34 books on Jethro Tull. But so that's the music section. Then I've got the history of the world. And when I say the world, I mean excluding South Africa. That's everything, political books, biographies of, Obama's biography, that kind of thing would be there. Then there's history within South Africa, because obviously being here, there's more intensity to the number of books I've got. I read a lot of political books, Just sitting here next to me now are two. This is the Deal, which is all about the government of national unity that we're currently living under in South Africa for the first time. And this is Liberation and Corruption by Peter Hain, who was an activist during the deep days of apartheid, on the whole issue globally of why liberation movements, when they come to power, invariably fail and collapse into corruption. So that's the kind of stuff that goes under South African political. Also biographies of local people who interest me. Then there's a section on business, which is less exciting. It's quite vast, and it's been built up through my career. That's the one I'm sort of culling most, because there's a lot of stuff there that's either been overtaken by the internet, where you can access stuff easily on the internet that I used to have in book form, or there's stuff that I just feel is so internalized in my hard drive that I don't really need to keep it anymore. So that's making space for fiction largely. Then section 7 is lumped together philosophy, science, and religion, just as a loose category that works for me, because the religion has both the theists like C.S. Lewis and the atheists like Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins. And I think the Richard Dawkins bit bleeds over into the science, and that's why they all sit together. Then there's a category called entertainment, which is largely biographies of people. I mentioned very recently over the year end that Ben Elton's autobiographies just arrived to fit into that category, which I'm very excited about. And within entertainment, I put in there, I've got lots of books of quizzes and things like that. We have a group of friends here who, during lockdown, I got volunteered to do a weekly quiz, a virtual online quiz, which was more fun than I've had for a long time. And I'm not sure whether they ever recovered quite from the experience, but I've got a lot of books on how to set up quizzes, etc., and cartoons. I've done quite a bit on the channel talking about the importance of cartoons, and we have a very, very good local cartoonist called Zapiro. I think I've mentioned before, he puts out an annual of his cartoons, which are very biting and very, very good, because someone needs to prick the emperor and tell him he's got no clothes. Then a small section on travel books, both picture books of places I've been, because when I worked in Holland, I was in a global job and I went all around the world collecting nice coffee table books, and also travel writing. I was recently excited to discover that Anthony Trollope wrote books about South Africa. So any writing, all from that sort of serious highbrow writing to the Michael Palin stuff, that's all in the travel writing section. And in the last section, number 10, is big reference works. I've got, those part work editions that you used to collect week by week in the 80s, things like great writers, great artists, great composers. I've got a whole bit of those, which are fantastic to go back to and dip into when you just want to refresh your memory. So again, a bit of a long-winded answer, but there were quite a lot of sections.
And you upkeep these sections?
Yeah. Well, what do you mean by upkeep? Yes, I mean stuff goes in them, stuff comes out of them. They're all live.
Oh, okay. We'll move on to.
I wasn't kidding when I said it's not as chaotic as it looks. I have a mind map. I know where everything is.
We'll move on to Catherine at the Literary Latte. I would love to know what booktubers inspired you to begin your channel, and an unpopular bookish opinion. Maybe a book you really enjoy but others dislike.
Okay, Catherine's a lovely channel. I think, at the risk of embarrassing Steve, there are two booktubers who finally pushed me over the edge, because I watched BookTube, like most of you do, for quite a while before finally taking the plunge. And I think ultimately it was Steve with his encyclopedic knowledge and his conversational style. Insert blushes here, Steve. And secondly, Shelley, who, as a librarian, has a bubbly enthusiasm for books that's entirely infective. And I caught that bug, and I thought, boy, I want to have part of this fun. And so those two are the two that pushed me in. There's a long list of others that I loved watching and were probably part of the journey. But in the interests of time, I'll just name check those two. An unpopular bookish opinion, Steve, you'll tell me whether it's unpopular enough, but I didn't like Henry James's Turn of the Screw. When I read The Turn of the Screw, I found it, in fact, it's here, because I want to read you an example of what I'm calling his rambling and ponderous prose. I described it as like running through treacle. So this is my revenge for the Bob Dylan stuff, right? So this says, I couldn't abjure for merely wanting to, but I could repeat to Mrs. Gross, as I did there, over and over in the small hours, that with our small friends' voices in the air, their pressure on one's heart, and their fragrant faces against one's cheek, everything fell to the ground, but their incapacity and their beauty. It was a pity that somehow, to settle this once and for all, I had to equally to re-enumerate the signs of subtlety that in the afternoon, by the lake, had made a miracle of my show of self-possession. Now, if you kept up with that, then you're doing better than I am. I found a lot of the writing was like that. It was heavy and dense, and the scary bit of it didn't get to me as much. Now, maybe that's unfair because maybe this book's been around a long time and I've heard a lot of people talk about it. That may have slightly dulled the edge of the thing. But anyway, I'm presuming that's an unpopular opinion, but there it is. And there was also a comment in there about maybe a book that I really enjoyed that others disliked. Now, again, put the boxing gloves on, Steve, because I like John Williams's Stoner. And I think you don't like it. Yeah, from your reaction, I can see that you don't like it. I'll tell you why I like it, because I relate to it. People say this is a dude bro book, and it's not. To me, it's exquisite writing about an introvert's life, lived quietly on his own terms, not on the terms of others. And I relate to that. And just to ram the point home, I want to read the last paragraph of the book. So I hope it's not a spoiler alert, but the book is basically his life from birth to death. So there's a death, right? But if you read the way it's described, he's written a book and it hasn't been a great success. And he's come to terms with that fact. So it says here, on his deathbed, he's holding the book that he wrote. And it says, he opened the book, and as he did so, it became not his own. He let his fingers riffle through the pages and felt a tingling, as if those pages were alive. The tingling came through his fingers and coursed through his flesh and bone. He was minutely aware of it, and he waited until it contained him, until the old excitement that was like terror fixed him where he lay. The sunlight, passing his window, shone upon the page, and he could not see what was written there. The fingers loosened, and the book they had held moved slowly and then swiftly across the still body and fell into the silence of the room. Now, is that not beautiful writing, Steve? Am I missing something?
Writing. That is terrible writing. And also indicative of the horribleness of the book. Anywhere in Stoner does Stoner have that kind of reaction to anything that was not created by Stoner? Nowhere. The book is an absolute gigantic marble mausoleum completely carved out of self-pity and misogyny.
All right. Well, we're not going to agree on that either.
Yeah, it's not Chaucer or Shakespeare that he feels that for at the end. No, the final, ultimate validation, not only of his existence, but of the cosmos, is his own unjustly neglected work. Oh, God.
I've never written a book, but I would think if I had written it, it would be a very special part of me. But anyway. Let's agree to, as they say in the political podcast that I watch, to agree disagreeably. No, to disagree agreeably. Sorry, to disagree agreeably. Okay, maybe we should move on.
We can move on to Colonia Agrippina. I don't know that handle, but I know that Deb and I did spend a week in Colonia Agrippina. We had a shack over a fish shop.
Well, I can tell you something about this person, is that because he mentioned to me in another comment that he only came to my channel because of you. So thank you, Steve. He's one of your subscribers, one of your millions. So no wonder you don't know him by name. But he came across because you sent him. So thank you for that. And then obviously he's got a question.
Would you share some of the books that were important to you when starting out as a reader? Formative books, so to say. Obviously, starting out, reader and formative is all open to interpretation. Answer any way you like.
Okay.
We've covered a bit of this ground already.
Yes, indeed. I was going to say we've covered it, but I would just say that growing up in the 60s and 70s in South Africa, there was quite a lot of restrictions on books available in terms of some of the choices. So the focus was very much on sort of safe old classics, the heroes. So Ivanhoe, Macbeth, Hamlet, Oliver Twist. But if I think hard, it was probably the Count of Monte Cristo that first excited me as to what a great book can do. In terms of sucking me into the adventure. And I think that's probably the first book I read where I thought, wow, this reading stuff has got something going for it. I can lose myself here in amazing stories. So that's how I would answer that one.
All right. We move on to the aforementioned Shelley Swearingen. What are some of your long-standing favorite books? What is your favorite snack? And what is your favorite meal?
Okay. Yeah, I've mentioned the Count of Monte Cristo. That's one of the first I read and enjoyed. Another two from that same era where I distinctly remember engaging in these adventure stories was Anthony Hope's Prisoner of Zenda and Rupert of Hentzau. Those two books I remember being quite excited by when I read them.
Oh, wow.
It's a long time ago. And then Adam Bede was a prescribed set work, which again, everyone was meant to hate, and I didn't hate it, so I quite liked it. And I would also mention for context that South Africa only got television in the late 1970s when I was a teenager. So I had a slight advantage in that up till then I'd been having to make more of my own entertainment, hence some of these reading exercises, because I think television obviously has huge benefits, but like these phones of ours, it's a double-edged sword. So in terms of favorite snack, not thinking too hard because I'm fond of a lot, but popcorn is a weakness. Anybody who puts popcorn in front of me, I'm gone. Favorite meal, I have to say, I don't think I've ever met a form of food that I don't like, and that can be a challenge. I've had struggles in the past with weight, and I'm actually the result of a successful bariatric surgery in 2018. So I'm half the man I used to be. And it's helped me substantially in finding a better balance between food and weight. But if I had to define the best meal as a concept for me, it would be a long, slow gathering in an Italian restaurant with a lot of white wine and wonderful company and someone else to drive me home.
So not wine and calzones at Hyde Cottage.
Well, there I don't have to drive home, so I'm probably all right.
No, you just pour yourself onto the David Murphy Memorial cot and sleep your required 15 hours. We'll move on to Sandra. My non-bookish question is, in a recent online discussion with Book Community, we were talking about what animal perils lay outside in the backyard. So what close encounters with your local wildlife have you had?
Okay, I live in a wonderful leafy green suburb with trees on all sides, which is wonderful from an ambience and even from a temperature control point of view. The downside is it's a natural habitat for monkeys. So we have a lot of monkeys. People who tell me the monkeys are about to go extinct, I just don't buy it because there's a hell of a lot of monkeys. And they can be both a pest in terms of if you leave a back door open, they'll nip in and steal the bread. Or more seriously, they can even be a risk to the dogs. I don't know if you have any advice for me here, Steve, but I have, as you saw just now, 3 dogs, the smallest of which, Oreo, is the fierce warrior. The Rottweiler, as I believe many Rottweilers, is fierce on the outside and a cuddly teddy bear on the inside, but Oreo will take on all comers. She has no fear, and she has no concept of the fact that she's quite small in the fight. So we're worried. We always worry a little bit about monkeys, and if there are too many of them around, we tend to bring the dogs in. But yeah, although I live in Africa, it's not as if we're encountering lions or anything exciting like that. Monkeys is the closer we get in the residential area where I live.
Residential area. My own most memorable encounter with wildlife in your area was not in a residential area, and it was with a snake, not a mammal.
Yeah. Okay.
But I'm taking it.
Were you in wetlands or were you?
I was in what is now, I think, your second largest game preserve.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
And I'm assuming that, I mean, well, actually, you have 2 big nature preserves, right? Do you ever go there?
Not for a long time. I have been in my time, but they're sort of holiday destinations. You know, you make a trip to them. They're not really
for someone in Durban. They are.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But no, you don't have any problems with snakes on your street.
Technically, yes, but I mean, they're small, and I don't think they would be that serious. Every now and then, particularly if there's areas that are overgrown, you can get snakes. But it's not enough of a problem for people to be too overworked about it. As long as people keep their upkeep reasonable, it's manageable.
Now, when you mentioned monkeys, I'm curious, one more question before we move on. You would not, for instance, keep a bird feeder. There'd be no point, right? The monkeys would simply ransack it.
I don't keep a bird feeder. We do have a lot of birds. I'm constantly hearing them all over the place because of the sort of wooded, green, leafy environment. I don't actually, I've never thought about it. I suppose, yeah, it might be a problem. It might be a problem. I've never really thought about it because we've never actually had a bird feeder. So, um,
Hmm. Uh, Now, when it comes to the dogs and your monkey problem, my advice would be different from any other kind of backyard animal, which would be to get to know the monkeys. They are 97% identical to you genetically. You can learn to talk to them. You can learn to not talk to them, but negotiate with them.
oh, really?
Using food bribery, you can make sure that they know what they are allowed and not allowed to do. It's possible to do that with them, whereas with a badger or a backyard ferret or weasel or marten of some kind, you would never be able to do that.
Goodness me.
There's
That sounds hard to me.
there's a huge amount of precognitive neurological stuff that is identical with you and them. So
Yeah, I accept that biologically. Yeah.
But anyway, we're almost done. Sean Patrick says, hello and congratulations. I'd never heard of your channel until it was mentioned by Steve Donoghue. You seem extremely polite. Is that a fair assessment? I could not help but hear this question and hear it as almost like you, on the other hand, seem extremely polite. I could not help but think that he was drawing some sort of comparison
compared to what he used to. I couldn't possibly say. I have to say it's hard to judge for myself. I would say I have a personality that adapts to situations as needed. So I can get tough if I need to get tough, which I do sometimes in my work life, etc. But I would say that when I'm engaged with BookTube, you're catching me in my sweet spot. This is when I'm most indulged and most happy, and that probably helps to show my good side. So maybe that's why I come across as pleasant
and polite. Would you say that your coworkers consider you polite?
Yes, but not in any negative sense. I mean, look, I'm quite old, and in the old days, you got taught, to mind your manners and to respect your elders and not to talk at table and all this stuff that we got taught. So some of those habits have stuck. Yeah, I'm not backward in coming forward if there's an issue. But I'm not one who looks for conflict when it's not necessary. If there's something wrong with the meal, I'll engage with the waiter in a perfectly reasonable way to try and resolve the issue rather than to have a fight. But I won't just leave it.
Okay. And finally, Jack Walter asks, what author would you bring back to life so they could write one more book? And here, I guess, technically, you can't say Bob Dylan.
No, he hasn't gone yet. I thought hard about this question because it's quite a tough question, and I think I'm going to plump for Anthony Burgess because I feel strange saying this because I've only really read one Anthony Burgess, which is a strange thing to do to call him back from the dead. But as you probably know, if you've watched my channel at all, that one book was Nothing Like the Sun, his Shakespeare book, which I read for Shakespeare, and I was completely blown away. I was completely blown away by the power and skill of the writing because I felt like I was reading a book that Shakespeare might have written. And that was just a wonderful immersive experience. I completely loved it. I haven't read The Clockwork Orange. I've seen the film, of course, but I've seen other people on BookTube doing a buddy read and a group chat about Clockwork Orange, and they were equally blown away by the power of Burgess's writing. And if I look at the catalogue of his that I'm sort of busy collecting from all the secondhand stores, you've got The Wanting Seed, that's, science fiction about birth control in the future. And then he's got a book called Napoleon Suite and another one called Mozart and the Wolfgang, where he's playing, I know in the Napoleon Suite, he's playing with a novel by shaping it in the same way as the musical work of Napoleon is structured, which again seems amazing. Then there's Any Old Iron, which is the whole mystical sword in the stone story. And I've just recently found a copy of Dead Man in Deptford, which is the one about Christopher Marlowe. So I'm a complete novice, but I'm intrigued, and I'm hoping desperately that Steve's now not going to tell me that he's rubbish, because if he is, we're going to have a serious challenge.
No, he's absolutely brilliant.
Fantastic.
Absolutely
I'm very relieved.
Almost,
We'll let the Bob Dylan
unbelievable
thing pass.
Sometimes when authors are that prolific, there's a gigantic drop-off in quality from book to book, and that almost doesn't happen with Burgess. I can think of only a couple of instances where he is phoning it in.
Sure.
And the greatest irony of all is that A Clockwork Orange is one of those instances.
Oh, really?
So is Any Old Iron.
Okay.
Books where when Burgess is phoning it in, when he's not really trying, he's still better than anybody else.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, when you know him at the peak, he's incredible, and he's also a spirit animal of yours, because he is, like you, combines the literary and the musical in huge amounts. I think music meant more to him even than linguistics did, which is a lot. So, and he wrote a lot on music and also composed a lot of music.
I believe so, yes.
You have a lot. Oh my, it's almost enviable that you've only read one thing, because you have so much else to read. Earthly Powers, his enormous book.
Yeah, I've got that on my spreadsheet for December. Because a very good friend of mine who lives 2 doors down, when I said Anthony Burgess, he immediately said to me, "You've got to read Earthly Powers." A lot of people seem to think that's the magnum opus. I don't know whether you do, Steve.
It is. Okay. Yes. Okay. And that makes it all the more little traitors for me to say, because a lot of my fellow critics, when it came out, tore it to shreds.
Oh, really?
And I reread those reviews. I have them all. I reread those reviews, and I think, all right, well, the zinger that you're getting in here is just, you are correct, you are accurate, but you are missing the forest for the trees here. If this is what you're concentrating on, you always have to worry when you're reading contemporaneous book reviews of long books. Yeah. You always have to worry that maybe some of the animus involved is just that reviewers are very lazy. And that your editor said, "I want you to review this. I want a review of this in the paper," and you don't like the fact that you're responsible for a 900-page book, and that you just bleed that through in your review. But anyway, there you go.
I'm very pleased to hear that I'm on the right track with choosing.
Oh, you are. Oh my, you are. Oh God, practically any reading mood that you're in, he can answer.
That's excellent. And if I understand it, that brings us to the end of the questions. Steve, is that right?
That is the end of the questions. Yes, indeed.
Fantastic. Well, if I look at the clock, we've run for a magnificent 2 hours and 41 minutes. So I'll have to have a hard think about whether this gets chunked into a couple of parts, or whether people were strong enough to take it in one session. I think they'll want
it all in one session. It was fascinating. I could go on. I would have a million questions of my own, but we don't want it to be too long. But this was fascinating. Absolutely fascinating.
Well,
there was a subject that we touched on that we couldn't talk about for an hour.
That's also true. Hey? It may say something about our ability to waffle and talk rather. But Steve, let me seriously say I'm very, very grateful. These things are a lot more fun as a two-hander. I've seen people, ask their own questions.
I had never thought of it. But you're right. It is a lot more fun. People ought to do their Q&As this way.
I think it's more interesting. And of course, in my case, I'm completely spoiled, because when I'm saying I choose Anthony Burgess, I'm getting information about whether I'm choosing correctly all in the same package. So, it's just a bonus on bonus. So, but may I also say, just as we wrap up, thank you to everybody who's put me here. Whether we're arguing about 500 or 600 subscribers really doesn't matter. Even to the numbers guy, I'll get over it. But
that was just an obnoxious prank on my part. That's all.
Well, I'm very grateful. Nothing wrong with a push up the numbers. But I am enormously grateful to everyone who's involved in this experience of BookTube with me. Not just to Steve, particularly today, but always. Steve's always a supporter of my channel, and that means a lot.
But isn't it fun? Isn't it fun?
It is fun, and I think that's perhaps the secret to it. I think I do see some booktubers sort of seeming to stress that they're not doing enough or doing well enough, etc. I think maybe it helps to be old, because once one gets old like I am, you cease to care too much about some of the metrics that other people worry about, and the focus seems to be more and more on how do I squeeze the most amount of enjoyment out of the time that's left. So perhaps
I hope I have that attitude when I reach your age.
Yeah, I'm sure you will. It's a long way off. It's a long way
It's a
off.
long way off. I dread it.
I can barely remember when I was 28, Steve. It's very, very hard to cast my mind back to that time. But anyway, thank you so much, both Steve and the wider you guys out there watching this thing and having
a marathon Q&A session with many digressions. How wonderful. And also, BookTube is cheering now. You are now everybody's favorite BookTuber because you defended Stoner and read Bob Dylan lyrics to me. The only thing missing was Cormac McCarthy, but that's okay.
Now, I have to confess, I haven't actually read Cormac McCarthy, and I have a few books of his, obviously. I'm not sure I'm going to disagree with you on Cormac McCarthy. My feeling, I just have an instinct that I'm not sure I'm going to love him. Maybe it's harsh to
you
prejudge.
have never read Cormac McCarthy, but you have occasionally had food poisoning. So, 6'7", as the kids say.
Well, on that childish note,
I strike no other kind of note.
Yeah, both Steve and I have to make sure you know that we do know what 6'7" is about, just to show that we're right there at the cutting edge, you know.
Yes, we are.
Right. Okay, this is only going to go downhill from here. So thank you very much. Thank you, Steve, and thank you, audience. Those of you who've lasted to this need a long term. In South Africa, we have one of the world's ultra marathons called the Comrades Marathon, and it feels a little bit like anyone who's lasted with us to 2 hours and whatever minutes should get a finisher's medal. So
I can't help but think that it's only going to go downhill from here. Could have been edited and put in at the beginning.
I suppose the real question now is, do I ask for the like and subscribe now at the end when no one's still here, or do I go back and edit it in at the beginning? But we'll leave that question unanswered for now. Steve, thank you so much. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye. Well, that was a whole lot of fun. And it did go on a little bit longer than we planned. But what could possibly happen when you put Steve Donoghue and me together? It's not going to be quick. You surely knew that. And in late breaking news, having just finished our session with Steve and I and all the questions you sent in, I see on my channel a couple of late entry questions, and I did promise to try and get to all of them. So if Steve will forgive me, on my own, I'm going to look at 3 questions that just arrived. 2 of them are quite similar. One is from L. Tell, who says, "Hi mate, glad to have found your channel through a certain 28-year-old super hottie." I've no idea who he's talking about. What sparked your love for reading, and what South African authors would you recommend reading? Okay, I think we've covered that in the questions. I've talked a lot about my youth and how I sat in libraries and learned to love reading, and I do talk quite extensively in the session with Steve about South African authors. So I think we're covered with that. Aaron, read a book. Hello, Aaron. It says, here is a few random questions. Do you follow any sport? If so, which? Favorite music biography? Any South African authors you think we should be more widely known? So I'll take the South African authors question as read in the session with Steve. And I'll link the sports question to the other question from Jar Reed, who sent me a question. "Hi Mike, I recently discovered your channel and you've quickly become one of my favorite booktubers." Well, thank you very much. That's very kind. This is my question. "I'm sure you're familiar with the Springboks." Oh yes. Do you support them? And if so, who is your favorite player? So I can answer Aaron's question. I like pretty much all sports, but rugby, of course, is the religion in this country. And the beauty of rugby is that from the dark days of apartheid, when it was a whites-only game, it has managed through brilliant leadership and transformation and frankly winning, it has managed to become the sport of the nation, led by Siya Kolisi, who's a fantastic player and leader, and the coach, of course, Rassie Erasmus, who's a good old farmer's boy from the Free State, Afrikaans as they come, has risen to the challenge of the new South Africa and has turned one of the things that this country does really well into a sport that every South African supports, and we're now truly world class, having won 4 World Cups, which is more than anyone else has done. So it's rugby all the way, to answer both of those questions. Favorite music biography is a tough one. I think, Aaron, if you'll forgive me, I'm actually going to take that one under advisement. I need to think hard about that, and maybe there's a video in that to say who are my top 10 music biographies. So I might cheat and not answer that one immediately. I could throw names out there. Of course, I mean, as I said in the Steve session, I have 34 books on Jethro Tull. So by definition, the biography and the deep dive studying of that band is something I've done more than any other author. But there are some fantastic ones out there. I've just received a copy of Dire Straits' John Ilsley's biography, which I haven't read yet. I've yet to read Carly Simon's biography, Boys in Trees. I'm told it's fantastically written. And I could go on and on. But I'll kick that one down the road, maybe for a video in the future. But thank you guys all for the questions. I just wanted to sneak it quickly in. It's not as if the session with Steve wasn't long enough, but I thought, let me just quickly tack this on the end. It won't do any harm. And I did try to promise to get back to everyone on the questions. So thank you so much to Steve for what he did, answering all your questions and curating the questions from everybody else. He's an absolute star. I'm so grateful, and I'm grateful to all of you. And I'm glad if you've got as far as you have in watching this video, you deserve a winner's medal. So thank you very much, BookTube, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye now.